Amongst the focal epilepsies, it is important to know where in the brain seizures start. The most common type of focal epilepsy involves the temporal lobe of the brain. There's the right temporal lobe, and then there's the left temporal lobe. Temporal lobe epilepsy presents in a myriad of different fashions. Mesial temporal lobe epilepsy involves the middle portions of either the left or the right temporal lobe of the brain. The mesial temporal lobes of the brain are heavily involved with working memory or short-term memory formation, emotional control, taste processing, smell processing. Many people with mesial temporal lobe epilepsy often have auras, which are tiny little seizures involving very small aspects of the temporal lobes of the brain. Commonly, in mesial temporal lobe epilepsy, patients will describe having auras of a very vivid and frequent déjà vu spell, a sudden onset taste, what we call a gustatory hallucination, such as a metallic taste in the mouth. The auras may involve sudden smells, where people might describe that they smell some burning that other people around them do not smell, because the brain literally plays a trick on these patients, with seizure activity involving the smell centers of the brain, giving them this feeling as if they are smelling something. Auras might be complicated, such as an epigastric rising sensation, because there are a lot of connections in the gastrointestinal tract involving the mesial temporal lobes of the brain. The outer portion of the temporal lobes is called the neocortical temporal lobes. Seizures involving the neocortical temporal lobe often are bizarre in presentation. In the back portion of the brain that deals a lot with visual processing, patients might have sudden visual changes as their aura at the beginning of the seizure. Patients may have a sudden change in their ability to hear, because the temporal lobes involve auditory processing. Many people with temporal lobe epilepsy also might have a lot of cognitive problems associated with their epilepsy, such as short-term memory problems. The frontal lobe focal epilepsies involve the frontal lobe of the brain. In the frontal lobe of the brain, there is a lot of connection involving motor function, and oftentimes in people with the frontal lobe epilepsies, they will have seizures that are associated with hypermotor movements of their arms and or legs. These seizures that occur in the frontal lobes often occur out of the sleep state, and oftentimes you might hear of patients falling out of bed having bicycling movements of their arms or their legs, and then they might go into a secondarily generalized tonic-clonic convulsion thereafter. The parietal lobe of the brain involves sensory integration, and many seizures that emanate from the parietal lobe of the brain might be involving sensory or tactile changes in the way that the body feels. For example, if a seizure involves the sensory strip of the brain, people will often describe having a type of electrical-like feeling that starts in an arm, it spreads upwards to the face, and then it might go downwards into the legs of one particular side of the body. The parietal lobe of the brain is also the central proprioceptive center of the brain that involves position sense. And many patients who might have parietal lobe seizures might present with spells of extreme dizziness and vertigo. The parietal and occipital lobe of the brain also are heavily involved with visual processing. And in fact, the occipital cortex of the brain is the primary visual cortex of the brain. Seizures that emanate from the occipital lobe of the brain often present as sudden onset visual changes, where patients might see sparkles of light in one particular side of the vision. Additionally, seizures that come from the parietal and occipital lobe of the brain are often associated with sudden onset headaches or intractable migraines, and many patients who might have unexplained migraines may often have parietal and or occipital lobe seizures without any further clinical presentations. Please schedule an appointment with us at Neurology Center for Epilepsy and Seizures so that you can be evaluated for the possibility of a focal epileptic condition.